Today is March 25th, 1998. We're with Miriam Borenstein, B-O-R-E-N-S-T-E-I-N. Her maiden name was Hoffman, H-O-F-F-M-A-N. I'm Lori Fine. We're in Brooklyn, New York, the United States of America, and our language is English. Today is March 25th, 1998. We're with Miriam Borenstein. Her maiden name was Hoffman. I'm Lori Fine. We're in Brooklyn, New York, the United States of America, and our language is English. Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you please tell us your name with the spelling?
My name is Miriam, M-R-M-A-R-A-M. Borenstein, B-O-R-E-N-S-T-E-I-N.
What was your maiden name?
Hoffman, H-O-F-F-M-A-N.
What name is on your birth certificate?
Miriam,
How is it spelled?
the same as I spelled.
Did you ever have any other names?
Yes. Muncie, M-O-N-C-I.
When was this used?
This was used in Europe. It just so happens that it's been used here too. My husband used it because when I came here, I lived with his sister and her family, and her name was Miriam, and she had an upstairs and downstairs. And when one was called, we never knew who was who. So he remembered me from Europe as being called Muncie by my friends. So he continued with that name, but basically I prefer Miriam.
Did you ever have any nicknames?
No,
Any false names?
no.
When were you born?
December 13, 1924,
How old are you now?
73.
Where were you born?
Czechoslovakia,
Where?
I think. Czechoslovakia.
How do you pronounce that, please?
Czechoslovakia.
But the town, the city.
The town is Lipecka Poljana, L-I-P-E-C-K-A, capital P-O-L-J-A-N-A.
I'd like you to give me a list of family members, please, starting with your father, mother, and then siblings.
My father was David Hoffman.
And your mother?
My mother was Hinda Teichmann. Who else? Do I go to my siblings? My brother, who was the oldest, was Shmuel. Next were twins, my sister Rochel and Sarah. And I was the youngest, Miriam.
I'd like you now to describe your family for us, starting with your father.
My father was somebody who couldn't make a living in our town where we lived. So he went to the big cities. He traveled a lot, and he was a custom peddler. And he used to send home money to my mother, and that's what we lived from. And he would come home, let's say he'd be away for about 2 to 3 months at a time, and then come home, and then when the money would disappear, he would leave again. And so I basically grew up mainly with my mother.
What exactly did your father's job entail?
Custom peddling is something like over here in this country. Like a push cart, with stuff to sell, and he would mainly sell it to the Jewish people because in Prague they spoke Czech, so he didn't speak their language, so he would mainly deal with Jewish people.
What was his education?
I have no idea what his education was. I just know that he knew how to read and write. in what we call their Latin, Latin syllables. My mother could not read and write. She could just the Hebrew, only Hebrew she could read, not the davening, and not as much as my father, let's say.
Could you describe your father's physical build?
My father was short. We are my siblings were and are short. My mother was short too, but not extremely short. Let's say my father maybe was 2 inches taller than me, and my mother was about my height, and so are my sisters. We are all more or less the same height.
What sort of clothing did your father wear?
Black only. He was a very pious man, very extremely religious. And I think he instilled a lot of those feelings in his children.
Where did he daven?
He davened, we had a small shul in our town, and that's where he davened, and the whole town knew him as a very religious man. In fact, they called him the Baal Shem Tov.
How did he get the name?
It was just like a nickname, because he would be the one, let's say, that would practically open and close the shul. He would forever daven whenever he was home. That is.
Did he have any connection to Hasidus?
Sakmer, yes, I think he believed in the Sakmer rabbi, because in the First World War, the Sakmer rabbi told him he should not go to war, and he hid a big part of the time he was hidden by the rabbi, and at other times he was hiding where we lived. Sometimes, we had let's say a little farm, and we had a barn in the backyard, and he would sometimes be in the barn upstairs, on top where the hay was being stored, and the gendarme we had. That's what we didn't call them police, gendarme. They would come to look for him, and they would come to the house, and imagine my mother's fright knowing that he is in the backyard, and he really struggled a great deal hiding, not going to the war. Maybe he would have been better off to go according to my mother, I don't know.
What thought comes to mind when you think of your father?
Well, I have different thoughts. First of all, he wasn't there to discipline me, and I didn't grow up with a steady father, in the family. And then I didn't see him for about 20 years or something, because well, let me start in where my siblings, being quite older than, about 7 years older, the sisters. My brother was much older. In fact, he's gone already for the last 5 years. And they went away to Belgium, because a lot of the Jewish girls went to Belgium for a living, to work there and make a living for themselves, to be self-sufficient. And they were quite young when they did this, and they both got married out there. And he went to Belgium too after many years, but he didn't stay in Belgium. He went to England. That was his station out there. And he did the same thing as he did in Czechoslovakia. He was a custom peddler, and he was making very good money, because the pound was maybe 10 or 20 kronen, Czech kronen, and that made a lot of money. So much so, when he would send us money, it would always be like 1,000 kronen after we would exchange the pounds, And these were a few good years, but they weren't good for my mother. I didn't understand at that time. She was fairly young yet, and she didn't have a husband, and He was always away, and we thought that after everything is over, we will send enough money, he'll come home, and he'll eventually retire. But this was never to be, because he got stuck in England, in London during the war, and the way I found out, I think I'm jumping ahead of myself. Where do I stop?
We'll get up to the war a little bit later. I'd like to go back now to a description of your mother, please.
My mother was a very strict individual, and she was the one who disciplined me, and I feared her a lot. I didn't have a close relationship with her. And I had a very troubled life as a result, because I didn't have the warmth of a real warm mother, and I think it carried over a little bit for me towards my children, and I regret that very much. But apparently this is hindsight. But I just know that she was my mother. I respected her, and at times we were fighting when I was a teenager. And
what would you fight about? What issues?
The issues we fought about, because she didn't let go of me, because my sisters were away, my brother, my father, everybody was away, and she tried to smother me. I wasn't allowed to go with my friends, and if I went, I had to be back right away, and she needed me for her moral support, for her general support, for whatever else. And this made me terribly unhappy, and we couldn't be close, because if I stayed away and I didn't come back exactly when she wanted me, I heard about it.
Where was your mother born?
My mother was born in a different town called Bilka. It was a larger town than ours, but that's where she came from. Occasionally I would visit there. Her mother was still alive, so I would visit there, and a couple of uncles. But,
when your parents were actually home together, do you remember much about their relationship together?
It was, I don't know, I felt that, I can't tell if my mother ever loved my father. I think he loved her because she was a beautiful woman. I don't look anything like her. One of my sisters looks just like her. I look more like my father. And I think he was proud of her. She was a seamstress by profession. And, but they were fighting a lot, arguing a lot. I wouldn't say physically fighting, just, they had a lot of arguments. Maybe my mother must have been disappointed in her life, I guess. And I was born, she must have been in her middle 40s when I was born. So to me, she always looked like an old lady, you know what I mean? And my fear was, what's going to be? My parents will die, and how am I going to care for myself? This was a constant fear that I still have to this day. My husband is 5 minutes late. God should help him.
Could you describe your siblings?
My siblings, I didn't have all that much to do with my siblings, only that I felt that my mother loved my siblings better. You see, I was the one that corresponded with my sisters and brother, because my mother couldn't write. So when she would get a letter from them, she would bless them, and she would, oh, how wonderful. Especially one sister, she had a way of writing as if she is talking to my mother. And my mother used to just devour this, and I was so jealous, but I could never let on that I was jealous of her. How could you tell a mother, where she misses her daughter so much she shouldn't? So it was always a tense feeling on my part.
Do you remember any family times or celebrations when you were together with your siblings and your parents together?
We weren't together at any celebrations. There was no Do you mean
A wedding?
holidays?
Wedding or holidays?
Yes, like Passover and the high holy days and weddings with them, not hardly.
Where did they
Hardly.
live? Where did they live?
In Antwerp and in Brussels.
Could you describe your grandparents?
I only knew one grandmother, which was my mother's mother, and I had no relationship with her.
What was her name?
Scheindl.
The last name?
The last name, Teichmann. And my mother would send me to her mother sometimes, and at that time, as far as I can remember, she lived with a daughter-in-law because my uncle was here in America. You know, from our place, people were running either to America or to other democratic countries such as Belgium, France, and England, and a lot of people were left like widows, you know. And I cannot say that I had a good relationship because my grandmother never paid any attention to me. I love my grandchildren to pieces, but there wasn't that warm relationship between my grandmother and me. Maybe she was just a type. How can I understand? Must have been 7 years old or something. But I realize now how children pay attention to these things if if older people are nice to them or you know.
What languages were spoken at home?
Yiddish. That was my mother tongue, really.
What about in school?
In school, we spoke a form of Ukrainian, not exactly like in Ukraine days, because in the war, I met people from Ukraine, and they spoke a different Ukrainian, but I spoke the language very, very well, without an accent in school. Because I remember the principal once came in and he heard the way the Jewish children were speaking the language. He says they are not to speak anything, only the Ukrainian language. But I was allowed to speak anything I wanted. I only knew Jewish anyway, Yiddish. Then,
What do you remember about your town?
I remember a lot about my town. I remember the peasants that lived there, the neighbors.
Who were your neighbors?
My neighbors were Gentile people, peasants. We also had Jewish neighbors. And I remember my cousins. And we had my father had a brother living next door to us, and they never had a good relationship because the family liked my father better, and they gave him more land than they gave the brother, so the animosity was man-made, and it was immediate. And I remember my schoolhouse, a 2-room or 3-room schoolhouse, and I remember how much I liked school.
What was your favorite subject?
My favorite subject was geography. I loved geography. I loved knowing how people live in different countries and how they survive and so on and so forth. But it just wasn't enough.
Who were your friends?
I had girlfriends in my town, and I wasn't particularly close with anybody because some of my friends went away to Budapest, to different places. Once they came back, they felt like they outgrew me. So even though we were the same age and everything, and I was very hurt by this. And I was even friendly with the peasant girls, you know, because we went to school together. But naturally, it wasn't the same relationship as with the Jewish girls.
What was the general relationship between the Jews and the non-Jews of the town?
The relationship wasn't bad, except when here and there they burst out with anti-Semitic phrases. And then they let us, every once in a while, they let us know who we are and that we belong in Palestine. And this, this was very painful. But there were no pogroms as such, like in Russia or so. They envied the Jews, because the Jews dressed differently. They had the national code of dressing, and
Could you describe that?
well, their clothing came mostly from flax. Here we use flax seeds. Those are the seeds that incidentally come from that flax. They made cotton from that, and they had weaving that they themselves built. They were very ingenious, the peasants, And the warm clothing came from sheep, from wool, the wool from the sheep. And my father, when he was home, he was sewing their coats or jackets.
Did he have a sewing
And
machine?
that was in the wintertime, yes. We had 2 sewing machines, one a smaller one for my mother and one for my father. So when he was home, which was, let's say, mainly in the wintertime, he would do this sewing, and my mother would sew for the peasant women. And, that helped out as far as the livelihood is concerned. But we weren't rich by no means, not even just barely comfortable, barely.
Did you have any religious education?
Yes, I can daven very well, and even by heart, I might say. A woman next door, somebody my mother hired, and she taught me how to daven. I hated it because I had to be at her house twice a day, and that became very boring. But I had to satisfy my mother, so I just went. And now, thank God that she sent me, because now when I come to shul, I don't have to ask anybody. I know exactly what to do. So that was good.
Do you remember an exact address for your house?
Yes, it was 208, but there were only 2 streets. Ours was the main street. We lived on the main street. Then there was one other long street going the other towards the side, where a lot of Jews lived, and the schoolhouse was there. It's like 2 kilometers from my house. That's how I remember it.
Can you describe this house for us?
This house was a 3-room house. It was 2 bedrooms and a kitchen. And my parents built this. It was a wooden house. We only had wooden homes because where we lived there was a lot of forests, a lot of wood, and it was cheap. And everybody had wooden houses with wooden shingles on the roof. And what can I say? My parents built this house and became very much indebted. They borrowed money from a bank, and my mother had an engagement ring. They sold that, and she had earrings, and that was sold. Everything went towards the house. Plus, they kept paying out over the years that I can remember, monthly, to the bank. The bank was not in our town. We had to go a distance away to a 3rd town, which was the main city where we shopped.
Did you have any businesses in the town?
In our town, just groceries, about 4 or so, and shoemakers, and where they sell liquor, what is it called? A liquor store. That's about it.
Going back into your house, what sort of furniture did you have?
We had 2 beds, two I don't know if I want to cry or want to laugh, you know. Two long benches, and it was this. We had like a couch, but it wasn't a couch by no means. It was made out of boards, you know. Somebody who was a carpenter made this, and it opened up to beds, to two beds. And then our houses were heated by wood, and so we had a stove, and that was for cooking and heating. And that's it. And in the next room, we had a closet where you could hang your meager belongings. And that other room, the middle room was a kitchen, okay. The third room, I count the kitchen for a room. The third room was another bedroom. This is where the closet was, and there was a bed and a table and chairs. And this we would usually rent out to subsidize our income.
Who were the tenants?
The tenants were school teachers that came from different cities that were sent to be as teachers, but they lived like kings in comparison to us because they were being paid very, very well, and they were paying rent to us and to wherever they lived.
How did you get water?
We had a well in the yard that we ourselves built. A dug, I should say.
Could you bring us back to Shabbos in your home?
Shabbos in my home was, we would get ready the Friday. We would clean the house and cook the food for Shabbos. And the cholent, we had an oven, a brick oven, where we baked our bread and where we cooked the food for Shabbos, the cholent, and sometimes we had meat, sometimes.
What was usually in the cholent?
In the cholent was potatoes, and like I said, maybe a little piece of meat if we had. Otherwise, it was just brown potatoes and a kugel, a potato kugel and a lokshen kugel. And that was about it.
That's the end of our tape. This is tape 2 with Miriam Borenstein, and it's March 25th, 1998.
Right.
How did you spend Shabbos at home?
Well, by us, the girls didn't go to shul. Only the older people, the parents, went to shul. And my mother, being very pious, he would go to mikveh, rain or shine, or winter, or whatever else. And then he would go to shul. And the women didn't go in the winter time because it wasn't heated. So they only went in the summertime. And I would be the one, we didn't have an Erev. I would be the one carrying the svarim, the sidders, you know, to shul for them, and then come back and make sure that I davened.
Until what age were you allowed to carry?
13. Either 12 or 13, I'm not all that sure now. And then the men would come home, let's say like around 11 o'clock or so, and we would have our cholent, and then everybody was full. We just like camped out practically, you know, from filling up so much. And then we would go to sleep, and in the summertime, a long day, I would go for a walk with my girlfriends. And
who were these friends?
Girls that I went to school with.
You remember any names?
Sure. I remember the Jewish names. One was Brina, and one was Leah, and one was Chaya, and Yenta, and Malka, and that's about it.
What would you talk about when you were together with friends?
What did we talk about? Well, I had to think when we started liking boys, which was probably at an early age, you know. The hormones start raging. We would talk about boys, and we would talk about school, and we would talk about food. Food was a very important subject because I had some friends that were much better off than me. And so they had meat for Shabbos. You know, and I was embarrassed to say that we didn't have meat for Shabbos. So,
Were you ever invited to their homes for a Shabbos meal?
no, we didn't have that type. We didn't live that type of a life where we were invited. Like, you know, there was always just barely enough. You know what I mean? There wasn't. How should I say, surplus. There was no surplus ever. So people did not, at least where I lived, and never invited each other. Maybe family, but we didn't have such a close family. So that was basically Shabbos. And in the summertime, then we were waiting for shalashudas, to eat shalashudas. And again, the women were sitting outside and talking, and we were playing games, and, you know, depends which age it was. You know, later on, when we got to be teenagers, we would meet in other people's, in our houses, either once in my house, once in your house, once in this one's house, and we would learn how to dance, and again, reminisce about boys, and, you know, the usual stuff. Nothing like girls do over here. I mean,
How did you dress as a young girl?
very poorly. You know, I remember once I had one very nice dress, and I came to my grandmother, and my uncle had come from America, and I stayed there for a Shabbos. And the weather wasn't just nice outside. I was going to carry his siddur to shul. And because the weather wasn't nice, I would not wear that dress. It was a navy blue pleated dress with a camisole, orange camisole, and this was my best dress. And I said to my uncle, "Oh, I can't wear this. You know, Mother wouldn't let me wear this dress if it's not nice, if it's raining outside." So he looked at me, and my uncle, my mother had a sister here. Her younger sister came to America when she was a teenager, and she got married here, and she was very well off, and my uncle lived with his sister. His wife was in Czechoslovakia, and he was here. He was making money, sending home, and the same thing, thinking that eventually he'll come home, retire, and live forever after. And but coming back to that dress, so he says to me, I heard him say to his wife, "Look at that, she wouldn't wear that dress. Do you know," he says, "what my sister children," he called them by name, Sylvie and Clara, "what they wear? How much clothes they have?" And I don't know, I must have, maybe I was 8 years old already or something, and it really made a good impression upon me that I only had that one good dress. But I don't remember, I did wear it, I didn't wear it. The fact remains that we were very, very poor and lived very meagerly, very, well, what should I say, just with very little. But maybe if you don't have much, you don't want much, you know what I mean?
Do you remember Purim at home?
Yes, Purim was a very happy time because we got to eat all the goodies. You know, there was cake making and baking of this gigantic challah, and and everybody had slaughtered a chicken or a goose, and we really had a big feast, you know. And this is something I used to look forward to very much. We used to, you know, save up eggs and stuff like that, just to use it for Purim. So that was Purim.
What do you remember about Pesach?
Pesach, we worked ourselves to the bones. I mean, it was horrendous because the weather was usually, well, the weather is fairly comparable to this weather, but we would have snow because where we lived was very mountainous area, and we would have lots of snow. Even Pesach sometimes we would have snow, and we had to do most of our work outside, you know. In order to clean the house, you have to take everything out. And I remember as a young girl, I was working very, very hard to bring in the Pesach, sort of, you know. My sisters, when they were home, they worked, and my mother, and but she was also busy sewing because the peasants have their Easter, so she was readying their clothing, and she needed the money, and she needed the work. So occasionally we would hire a peasant woman to help us out for Pesach. And again, Pesach was also a feast time, you know. We always slaughtered a goose or two, fattened them up first, and then slaughtered them, and we had that, and potatoes, and all that stuff, latkes, and, you know, not to touch it. Oh, gosh, he told me I should.
How did you get matzah for Pesach?
Matzah, they baked matzah in our town. They baked matzah. I remember on two different occasions, 2 different years, that how should I say, they rented our house to bake matzah. The brick oven, we had that brick oven, and we had the room, and the matzah was being baked there. The women were rolling the dough, and it was done very efficiently and according to the din, you know. And there was matzah, and everybody brought their flour. And if you were well-to-do, you were always the first one to do it, and the poor people were the last ones. And but we had priority when it was done in our house, and we got paid also for the filth that they left is not to be described, but anyway, that was also part of Pesach. It was always a very exciting time. I always got to get a new dress and new shoes for Pesach that had to last me for the rest of the year, and it was just Purim and Pesach, these two, except for the work, I liked the best.
How did you get news in the house? Did you have a radio or newspapers?
No radio and no newspapers. It was mostly somebody, the official, the people from the administration, the mayor, let's say, and somebody else did get newspapers, and there was word by mouth mostly. Later on, much later, let's say a few years before I was taken to concentration camp, some people had radios. The teachers that were teaching, you know, they were the elite, and they had radios, and we were able to get some of the news through them.
What news were you hearing?
When there was bad news, unfortunately, I don't know how it is, it just travels. We had an idea that things are going bad for the Jews, and that the war was raging and where it was, and we also had more anti-Semites when Hitler came to power. Well, I guess that'll come later, I suppose.
Did you have any travelers coming to the town from other places?
Very seldom. Very seldom. Only Only the police, what I call the gendarme, they would come once a week, and the mayor that didn't live in our town, he lived in the next town, which was larger, he would come once a week, and they came to collect taxes, that they did. And I have never seen a Negro except on pictures.
When was the first time you saw that? When
In
did you first
real
see-
life, when I was in Germany, that was the first time.
When do you think the first time was that you realized what was happening to the Jews in Eastern Europe?
When, let's see, we were taken in 44. We already knew in 42, 43, we were getting the news, but not the real news. Everything was camouflaged, and everything was secretive, but here and there in 43, they were coming for certain people. There was one man, he came from Lithuania, a Jewish man. He married a girl from our town. He probably ran away from Lithuania. Probably the Russians were there. And a couple of people that were from Poland originally, and they were just taken away. They came for them during the night, and they just like snatched them away from their families, never to be heard again. And that was an omen. That was a bad omen. That things are turning for the worst. And let's see. Okay, I don't know at what point we are. In 39, I think it was, 38 or 39, Hitler made a pact with Hitler was an ally of Hungary. And he went ahead and he gave the part where I lived, the part of Czechoslovakia, which was Carpathia, that's where I come from, and he gave this part, Hitler, to the Hungarians, plus part of Romania. He annexed this. And so here we are no more Czechs, we are no more under a democratic regime, now we are under the Hungarians. As my parents remembered Hungary, which was Franz Josef, he was a good king, and everything was fine, and he was good to the Jews. But these were not the same Hungarians, because they had to do with Germany. And so whatever Germany dictated to them, that's what they did. Germany wanted the Jews, so they gave the Jews. But it started gradually. Basically, when I mentioned before that a couple of Polish Jews were taken, and this Lithuanian, and maybe one more, they were taken not by the Germans, they were taken by the Hungarians. So they became the Nazis, and they did whatever Germany dictated to them. And so here was a new language we had to learn, which was Hungarian, and we had to get accustomed to them. But we started realizing in their newspapers, once they came in, we got some newspapers and periodicals, and they were being very anti-Semitic. As time went on, there was not a page that you could look at that there wasn't something about the Jews. So we were becoming very fearful of them. And when they took us away, it was the Hungarians that took us away. To tell you the truth, I don't know, some people say that they saw Germans. I did not see a German until I came to Auschwitz. That was the first time I saw Germans. The ghetto, the whole thing being administered by the Hungarians. That's why I have the same feeling about the Hungarians as the Germans. To me, there is no difference, and you know what that means.
While you were still living at home, did things, life change for you? Was there a difference in how you were able to obtain food?
Yes. Food. There was a time when there was a famine, and other times there was, I wouldn't say a feast, but there was enough bread, because Hungary is a straight plateau. It's not like Carpathia, where I come from, where it's hilly and the soil is very poor. Hungary is different. They had enough wheat, and we had enough bread. Just for a year or two that there was really a famine. I remember that much. And food, I can't say that we were starving. We were really not. We weren't starving, but we didn't have plenty. So it was a status quo, sort of.
Was the food rationed?
The bread was rationed, and sugar was rationed, and yeah, that's about it that I remember of rationing.
Was there a difference between the allotments for Jews and non-Jews?
No.
Was there a time you had to wear a yellow star?
Yes.
When was that?
That was in '43. We had to wear a yellow star, yes.
How long were you able to go to school?
How many years? I went to eight years of public school. And that was it. There was no, what they call by us, a gymnasia. We didn't have what they call here high school. We called it gymnasia. There wasn't one in my town, so you had to go to a bigger town or a city, mainly a city. And my parents could not afford to send me. I so much wanted to, and I remember the principal talking to my mother that I would be good in school. I'm good in school, and it would be beneficial for me to go. And I don't know. Maybe in the back of my mind, I wanted to get away. And on the other hand, I also wanted to go to school, but it was just to no avail. At this point, my mother and myself were the only ones home. My father was in England. My sisters and brother were in Belgium.
When did your father go to England?
My father went to England for the same reasons my sisters went to Belgium. He went there for a livelihood. And he was doing very well until the war broke out. Once the war broke out, we weren't able to receive any money from him. And after a while, we didn't get any letters, and everything was censored. And after a while, we didn't know if he is alive or not. He didn't know if we are alive. And especially in the war, he certainly didn't know where we were. So let's see, where are we? Give me a hint.
You were still at home.
Yes,
You had finished school.
Yes, finished school, and we were still at home, and here I am, a teenager, and...
How did you spend those days?
I was helping out on the farm.
What did you do there?
I worked. We were seeding and cultivating and plowing.
What grew there?
Excuse
what
me?
grew there?
Mainly corn. Corn was our staple. Our bread was from corn meal, and beans. These two items were the staple. Then there were some vegetables in season. Potatoes. Oh yes, potatoes was also a staple. These three things: beans, potatoes, and corn. and we learned how to save it for the winter time. Um, uh, well, that's about it. And we also had a cow, so we obtained milk as long as we could. Eventually, the cow died, and you know, things went to pot. The barn was leaking in and everything. My father wasn't home, and there was nobody to fix anything, and my house was also, the roof was leaking, and we didn't know, you know, like all of a sudden when I started fearing that they'll take us away too, all of a sudden my house looked like a palace to me. When I walked outside, I admired my house. I said, oh my God, I'll have to leave this, you know. Leaving for what, you know? It's like the unknown, which is the most fearful thing. In 44, can I go to this part? In 44, April 44, the end of April, the middle, at the middle of April, like after Pesach, about a week after Pesach, they came for us. They came for everybody in our town.
Who came?
The Hungarians, the gendarme, you know, with the feathers. Did you ever see a picture of them? And they knocked on our doors, and they said that we are to be ready in an hour, and we are to assemble in the synagogue. We are to take just what we could carry in our hands. Nobody told us where we're going, for how long, are we coming back, are we going to work, definitely who thought of being killed, I mean. Okay.
What did you pack?
This is what I'm coming to. We became so confused. What do you pack? If we're going away for a long time, we need bedding. But how much bedding, how much can we carry in 2 hands? That is 4 hands, my mother and myself. Do we need dishes? Do we need pots? Do we need food? Do we need underwear? How much? How much clothes? We didn't have much. Should we take everything we have? Will it be too much? We became mortified. I tell you, at this point, I think I can cry. It was such a confusing time. Okay, we got ourselves together. We made a bundle on our backs and our hands, and we assembled in the synagogue, all of us, the whole town. There were about, in my town, there were about 50 families. But kids and old and young and sick and whatever. And there we were. Everybody is confused. Nobody's talking to anybody because we're so frightened. We're scared to talk. And of course, they had all the help from the local, from the community, from the peasants. And when the peasants found out that the Jews are leaving, they came down from the hills. They from all over, from the woodwork. They wanted to see we're all standing on the sides and talking to each other. And we are going, and we don't know where the hell we're going.
Where did you think you were going?
We had no idea, because nobody told us. So we found out. How did we find out? They put us on trucks.
How long did you stay in the synagogue?
We stayed till they assembled everybody, till they made sure that everybody was there.
How long do you think that took?
It took about a half a day.
How did you spend that half day?
There, like I said, we were just so upset and so and thinking maybe we should have taken this and maybe this and maybe we should have left this and taken something else, and this is the only thing we can think of, and do we have enough food, and will it last, and okay, they took us to a town on open buses, open trucks. They took us to a town, the next town to the big city where we did our shopping, which is Khust.
Who drove the trucks?
I cannot tell you, but it wasn't our people. And it wasn't our trucks, and we had no trucks, and they came for us. So we have no idea who they're Hungarians probably, who else? Or peasants, they're, those that weren't called to go.
Who guarded you on those trucks?
The gendarme.
Did anyone try to escape or hide at that time?
Only two people do I know, two boys that escaped. That's it. Other than that, everybody came. And we came to this town, and they emptied out a, how should I call it, where the peasants lived, in these filthy little homes, and in their barns we slept, and on the floor, and the mud, and in filth, and we were waiting there. We had no idea what we were waiting for, but we realized eventually that they are trying to assemble all the people, to collect all the people from all the hundreds of little towns and brought them together into this ghetto. Once we were all there, we were there about 6 weeks in all.
What was the name of this place?
Isa. Once,
We're going to stop the tape now. This is tape 3. We're with Miriam Borenstein, and it's March 25th, 1998. What do you remember about your first image of the ghetto?
my first image, well, first of all, we were looking for a place where we could put our heads down, where we could sleep. So we found this dilapidated little house. Their floor was not really a floor. It was made from mud, and we slept there like sardines, because they didn't have all that much room, because every day they were bringing in more and more people. Those poor people coming in, with a horse and buggy and with trucks and whichever way they could, as fast as they could.
How many people do you think were living in the ghetto?
Oh, I really don't know. I couldn't tell you. A few thousand.
Was there a wall or fence around the ghetto?
Not really. Not really, but nobody ran anywhere, because where was there to run? They took us from our homes. I don't know what they did with our homes or didn't do. Besides, we didn't know that from there we'll go further. We thought this too shall pass and it'll be over. Maybe we'll go back. But this was not to be.
Who guarded you there?
Their gendarme. They were the policemen. From now on I'll say the police, so you'll know what I mean.
Was any non-Jew able to get into this area?
No.
Was any Jew able to leave?
I was not aware of anybody, let's just say that. It was just the Jews, and they probably were glad to see us go, because they wanted our possessions. They were always jealous of as little as we had, some of them had less. Some of them, not everybody. There were some rich peasants, and most of them just were glad to see us go. That's as simple as that. The anti-Semitism was very ripe all over,
What was a typical
whether it was subtle or not.
What was a typical day for you while living there?
In the ghetto, just get our ration of food. And,
What was that?
And it was some kind of a soup, mainly soup, because we still had we took some dry stuff, you know, like bread that was able to stay, and so we ate as long as we had it. Then we came to them and we got their rations, or rations. Anyway, we were plenty hungry there, and we didn't know when this is going to end. But eventually it ended.
Can you describe more of the life while you were living there? How did you spend those days?
Oh, we were just meeting the young ones, talking to the young ones, the old ones talking to the young ones, and just reminiscing and crying and laughing and not knowing what the next day brings, and walking, and it was nothing special there, absolutely, because we were just hibernating. They were just watching us. We shouldn't run away, and that's all. What could we have done? Nothing, really.
Was there any religious life there?
Yeah, I imagine so. I imagine the man had a minion, you know. We didn't really care. Every day was the same. There was no Shabbos, there was no Yom Tov, no nothing, because it wasn't possible. We weren't in the mood for anything.
Did anyone die there?
One person died that I know of. One woman died.
Where was she
from our
buried?
town.
Where was she buried?
Out there someplace. I couldn't tell you. They probably just buried her and that's it. An older woman, because I was so young, so she seemed older to me, you know what I mean.
Was there any curfew there?
Probably. I can't remember, but there probably was a curfew.
When did you wear the star?
Oh, we wore the star up to Auschwitz.
When did you first get it?
We got it in let's see, 43.
Who gave it to you?
They ordered us to make up Jewish stars. So we looked for a piece of Jewish material. My mother was a seamstress. I mean, then there was no problem. She made probably for others also, and everybody wore a form of a star.
How did you feel the first time you had gone out in public wearing it?
A star. I felt terrible. You know why? Because I was singled out. Not because after all, I'm Jewish, but because I'm singled out to do so. So we didn't feel too good about it. None of us, I imagine.
Going back to the ghetto, do you remember the sounds of the ghetto?
The sounds of the ghetto was mainly clip-clap, you know, horses with wagons bringing in people every single day and distributing them all over this area, you know, where we occupied. And nothing special. I guess somewhere we washed our clothing, I guess.
Was there running water there?
No, nobody had running water. We had a well. There was no running water.
Was there any religious leadership? Were there any rabbis with you?
Yes. Yes, we had a couple. We had the rabbi from our little town. He was actually everything, the Shoah, the Mole, the Mohel.
What was his name?
His name was Hirsch Pearl.
Did anyone ask any shilas? Did you ever go to him for any questions?
Not I. I don't know if anybody did. He himself had a large family with him. I mean, people probably ask God, why is this happening? What is happening with us? And even though, our people were very pious, they say you're not allowed to ask questions. So we just went like sheep to the slaughter, that kind of stuff. Wherever we went. No resistance or anything. Nobody had any weapons or with the bare hand they would overpower us. They had the ammunition, not us. So they were the bosses. Whatever they said, if we didn't move fast enough, they beat us. So you moved as fast as you could.
Was there any hierarchy among the Jews? Any leadership?
Yeah, somebody that directed a little. Do this, don't go here, don't go there, nothing. Nobody was really in command because only they were in command. So they didn't have such powers, just superficial powers.
Do you remember any actions or raids while you were in the ghetto?
Raids?
Any actions?
No.
When did you leave the ghetto?
We left the ghetto, let me think, the beginning of May.
What happened then?
Or maybe the middle of May. What happened was they just told us to leave. So we left in 2 transports because they couldn't take everybody at once. So I think my mother and I, we went with the 2nd transport.
What did you bring with you this time?
Whatever we could.
Did you have a sitter with you?
Yes.
Had you used it at all while you were in the ghetto?
No. We took along whatever we did, some blankets, some clothing, some, the food was depleted already, so that we didn't have any more. So we just, whatever we could carry in our hands. And we went straight to the train. They took us straight to the train, which was waiting for us in Gust. There were, I don't know how many wagons from, these cattle wagons from one end to the other. You couldn't see the end to it. And we all went on.
Where did you think you were going?
No idea, no clue. I don't know, were we so dumb or something, or we didn't just want to think. We just thought that taking us, the able-bodied will be sent to work, and the others, I didn't want to think. But onto those cattle trains, they were pretty full.
How many people do you think were in your car?
Oh gosh, I just know that there was just barely enough room to stretch out. That's the only thing I can remember exactly. So I'm going to tell you in case you wouldn't ask me how did we go to the bathroom. We were on the train, I think 4 days and 4 nights approximately. And there was on the side of that train, of the wagon that we were in, I guess it's called a wagon, right? On the side there was like a barrel, and over there you were doing everything, whatever you needed to do. The stench was horrendous because we were closed up. There was a tiny little window, very tiny and very high up. If you wanted to look out, that is, you had to stand on something. There wasn't anything to stand on. You would pick up somebody, a child or something, to look out and tell us what they see outside, or the train itself. I thought was. The train itself had cracks in it, so we tried to look out through the cracks. We were able to see outside. We were able to see greenery, if it was greenery, or we were able to see a building, let's say.
Were you able to tell what direction the train was headed?
No, absolutely not.
When did you first find out?
When we found out was that must have been by the Polish border. At the Polish border, the Germans took over from the Hungarians. What happened was the train stopped every once in a whatever time. The train stopped either to refuel or I don't know for what reason. For whatever reason, the train stops. And the last time when the train stopped, all of a sudden we heard German speaking outside. What happened, I meant to say first, that when the train stopped, they would always jump off the train and went around the trains to see if everything is functioning right, if somebody isn't escaping or somebody didn't break out or something like that. So at that last point when it stopped, all of a sudden we hear German speaking instead of Hungarian, because I spoke very well Hungarian at that time. I learned it, So I says, uh-oh, here we are. I says, I hear German speaking outside. So sure enough, the Hungarians gave us over to the Germans at the Polish border, because Auschwitz is in Poland. And then we still had a while to travel to Auschwitz. And once we got there, it was strictly Germans. I did not see Hungarian anymore.
Do you remember any of the conversations from this ride?
The conversations were practically no conversations. Families stuck together, like for instance, I came with a large family, but my closest relative was my mother. It was mainly aunts and uncles and cousins and neighbors and friends. And so, of course, I stayed near my mother on the floor there. And we didn't know what was there to talk. We don't know where we are. We don't know where we're going. We don't know for what purpose. Certainly we didn't think that we're going into the crematoria. I mean, we never heard of that. That we didn't know. So we arrived in Auschwitz. We arrived there, the train stops, and they all get off. And
what did you see when the train doors first opened?
When the train stopped, somebody opened the door. They put them ajar. They opened them ajar. And we look out, and we see, first of all, we see heaps of valises and heaps of dishes, mountains practically, and mountains of clothing, and mountains of shoes, and mountains of whatever you can think of. I says, oh my God, what is this? And here we see men and striped uniforms, and a beret, a striped beret, and we hear some of them speak Yiddish. So somebody from our wagon says, where are they taking us? In Yiddish to this fella. So he says, like that, without he probably wasn't allowed to talk to us, or he wanted to tell us, and we should understand where we're going, in case we didn't, and we didn't. So somebody says, oh, what a mean person he is. Why does he do that? We knew that means underground, okay? So that's that. Eventually, an assessment comes up, one assessment to a train, where one comes up when we were staying, when the train we came in, and he says to us like this. He says, if you have any dry food, he says, like nuts or something, eat it up. He says, and the rest you leave everything here. You you come off empty-handed. So we thought, all right, so we'll come back and we'll collect our stuff. It's no big deal. So we still had some dried nuts, so we ate that, and that was our food for the day. So, but we also saw the very ominous thing. We saw assessment. We saw they have ammunition on themselves and big sticks, and we see these mad dogs. Some of them walking around with those dogs. They're barking. They're jumping. They're crazy all around. We are still in the wagons at this point. Eventually, they tell us to come off. Everybody came off. You know, I was young. I jumped off right away. I helped my mother. I helped somebody else. And then they tell us to stand in line of 5. You probably heard this story 1,000 times. Okay, so we stand in 5s, and I'm holding on to my mother, and eventually when everybody was off and everybody was lined up in 5s, as far as the eye can see, one way and the other way, and we see these assessmen milling around all over the place and talking to each other, and nobody says a word to us, and we don't know what the next step is, but we were frightened as can be, and that the baby's tired from the trip, and they're screaming and they're crying, and the mother's trying to calm them, and some they could calm, others they couldn't, and then eventually somebody comes around, a big shot assessment with somebody else with white gloves, and that stick that a soldier, you know, that a policeman carries, you know, and he goes with the stick. You go this way and you go that way, and you stay. You go this way and you go this way and you go this way and you go that way. And he went around. Maybe it was Mango, I wouldn't know.
What did this man look like?
That man looked very frightening, a tall SS man in his uniform, a striking figure, and he went around. Maybe in other parts somebody else was. I'm just telling you what I saw.
What time of day had you arrived?
We arrived in, let's say, in the afternoon, I would say. It was summertime. The day was the longest, and the sun was shining, but it was very cloudy out there. I found out later why it was so cloudy. But the sun was still out, and that must have been in the afternoon sometimes.
Do you remember the sounds of the camp when you first got there?
The sounds of the camp, it was a lot of some talking by the assessment. They were talking to each other, and the dogs barking, and I can't remember anything else. You know, we were so frightened. You know, when you're so frightened, you cannot think straight.
Did you notice any smell when you had gotten off the train?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Maybe the smell was there and I wasn't cognizant of it. Eventually, they tell me also to go in the other direction. So I let go of my mother, and I'm walking away. As I'm walking away, as I'm a fair distance away from her, I look back, and my eyes, we were both looking at each other. That was the last time. So I don't know exactly what they did to her. I found out later on that they perished the same day, those that didn't survive. Uh, Now I'm going to describe where they took me. When they accumulated a lot of people, I couldn't tell you the exact amount, we were marching with SS women and men. And we come to this flat building, a barrack, a flat barrack, and they tell us to go in, and we we obey their commands, and we come inside, and they tell us to get undressed. We should take everything off, whatever we are wearing. Stuff we didn't have, like I said, we left in the train. So we only had, like, let's say, my dress, my shoes, and whatever else underwear I was wearing. So they say to get undressed, and you have to understand we are all young and immature, and we don't know, and embarrassed, and get undressed. There are a lot of men milling around, SS men, and also Jews. These in striped clothing with a striped beret. They are helping out. It's not the SS that are doing the dirty work. It's our people that are doing the dirty work, and they had to do it,
These
or
were
else.
Men or women?
Men. Didn't see women, just men at this point. And so we're embarrassed, and we hesitate to get undressed, and they realize that we're not moving fast enough, so they start hitting on us. Then we realized right away that they mean business. So we got undressed. We got undressed completely.
Who hit you?
SS.
Did the Jews have any weapons?
No, absolutely not. Nothing. Once we're undressed, we surely don't have anything. But when we were dressed, I described what I wore, and everybody was wearing the same thing. So once we're undressed, we had to sit on a bench, on a long bench, and they were taking our hair off. They
Who
were
did this?
shaving. This was done by Jewish men and women. Comes to think of it, you're right. I did see women, but mostly men. Somehow the men made a bigger impression upon me. And
Did they say anything as they were doing this?
not a word.
Did anyone give you any advice or hints?
Not advice, and not a hint, and not advice. They were not allowed to talk to us.
What type of place did you think you had arrived in?
I realized, I still didn't realize that how close doom is. I don't know. I don't know. I was just besides myself. I didn't know what the hell is going on. I'm just obeying their commands, and that's it. And so they took our hair off, all our hair. And
Did you recognize
and
any
we
of the
look at
people?
each other, and we don't recognize each other, and some of us are crying, and others are controlled, and they tell us to go into the next room, which was the shower. Well, that felt good, the warm water. It was like a minute or so shower. And then out, and to stand on line to get something. And we do that, and once everybody's got their dress, if you're tall, your dress is up to here. If you're short, mine was up to the floor, and then they tell us to go outside and wait. But we're not alone. No place were we alone. SS was all over with us, and then the SS women also. They partook in everything. and everybody standing outside, and it was pretty cool yet. And we were out of a shower, and we didn't dry ourselves or anything, just, pulled on that schmatte that they gave us. And when everybody was out, or at least a certain amount, maybe a couple of hundred or something, about 200, let's say, then we are marching with them. Where we are marching is to a barrack, and we come into this barrack and we find there 1,000 women already, and with us it made 1,200. And we see there are 3-tier beds, but for some of us there was no room anymore on the beds until they built beds. So I was one of them who I had to sleep on the concrete. We were sleeping on the cold concrete with our shoes under our heads and nothing else.
What shoes did you get?
I didn't get shoes. The shoes they allowed us to keep the shoes. So as long as they lasted.
It's the end of our tape. This is tape 4. Today we're with Miriam Borenstein. It's March 25th, 1998. Were you tattooed when you went into Auschwitz?
I was not tattooed because I was, first of all, let me backtrack a little bit. I came to the camps in 1944. I came to Auschwitz when Auschwitz was built up already. And everything was intact when I came there. Then, by that time, the crematoria was already working day and night.
When did you become aware of its function?
Oh, much later on. Well, I'll come to that. In other words, I was what they call Vernichtungslager. I think you know by now what that means. And I was not tattooed, and I had no idea why some were and some weren't. I just know that while I was in that barrack, I realized that somebody was coming around every week to inspect us. We had to march in front of him naked.
Who was this? Do you know?
An assessment. Yeah, I can't tell you what rank because I didn't understand rank in those days. And he was observing our bodies to see who was able-bodied, and whoever he thought wasn't was taken out and never to be seen again. And we didn't know why and for what reason. And nobody was terribly concerned because since we didn't know, we had no reason to be concerned. So that was that. Now could you start me off again?
When you got to the barracks, were you aware of any number or letter designation? Which lager this was?
Yes, I was in Lager C, number 11.
Who were you with there?
I was with nobody that I associated with at home, just some casual friends, you know, but nobody really of my family. Actually, that's what I'm trying to say. And I was basically alone.
Who was in charge of this barracks?
Who was in charge? As you come into the barrack, in fact, some of them, I hope I'll get a chance to describe because I was there 4 years ago. As you come into the barrack, there is a little room on the side, and that room is for a Jewish girl, and I'll describe who she was. She was one of the 9,000 Slovakian girls who they kept alive, and they were the they called her Lager Älteste, meaning she was the Lager, the commandant, sort of. But she only had certain duties to do. I mean, she couldn't send us to the crematory or anything like that. She had to see when the lights are on or off, and it should be quiet, and what we should do, and if she wanted volunteers for something, she asked, but she had a little room for herself, which was always locked. She had an easy life at this point, but it wasn't easy because from 9,000 there were 900 that remained. So obviously she was in the same boat we were, and some of them were very stern, and some of them were downright mean, and they were constantly throwing up to us that, oh sure, you came, everything is already here. Look. And she says, we had to build all this, and like we're so lucky. All right, this one wasn't all that mean. She was stern because she had to be, but she wasn't really mean like I heard some others were.
What's her name?
Luba. I don't know her last name. We only called her Luba. No, this was Ollie's, and Luba was in Germany. Oh, I got them confused. Ollie's, okay. And she was a redhead, a very pretty girl, and she did her job, and that's all. What else could she do? She had to do whatever she was told.
Were there any privileged jobs or positions in the camp?
Not in Auschwitz. In camp proper in Germany, when they sent us to Germany, yes, but not in Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, we were all in the same boat. They probably would have killed us off all, but the war was sort of like closing in on them.
What did you hear about the war?
In Auschwitz, nothing.
Did anybody speak to you?
Nope. Nobody.
What languages did you hear?
We only spoke to each other.
What languages did we use there?
Hungarian and some Yiddish and some Romanian. It depends, because like, for instance, like I said, the Hungarians annexed some of Romania also, so the Jews were theirs to be sent away. So there were some Romanian Jews, and they spoke Romanian between themselves, like American would speak English, you know what I mean. And they were sometimes ridiculing the Germans. They were saying, oh, you're Jews, you don't even speak your language. They knew that Jewish and German was very similar, or at least part of it, and they felt that they didn't understand the commands that they were given. So what kind of Jews are you anyway, there to determine what kind of Jews we are.
Were you able to keep track of the Jewish calendar while you were in Auschwitz?
No, absolutely not. But some were, I don't know how. Some were, but I was not able to I tell you the truth, I wasn't even interested. I was not interested which day was what. I didn't know when Shabbos was. 'Cause I saw in Auschwitz, I saw some girls davening. I admired them, but that's all.
Was there any older person who helped you
Where?
in Auschwitz? Were you ever in a position to help anyone?
No. No, except when we were standing. Well, we did not work in Auschwitz. We did no physical work, and that was also terrible. Because the only thing that we did do, they were forever counting us. They called it Zählerpell. So in the morning and in the evening for hours, rain or shine. And we were sometimes standing for hours and hours because, for instance, I was in a radius of about 32 barracks. and there were about 30 or 35,000 women. And you know, when they woke us up 4 in the morning, some people didn't get up, even though we were young, but some didn't get up right away. Especially young people want to sleep. And if they counted and one was missing, we were always punished collectively. If one was missing, they would not let us go in the barrack until they found this person. And when they found them, believe me, I don't envy them. They beat them up like anything, because, you know, they had a responsibility. These SS, they were all responsible. Somebody shouldn't run away or something. So we had to be counted wherever we went, from the time we got off the train. So where was I?
What did you do all day?
Okay, so we did nothing. So they would let us out during the day. They would let us out for a couple of hours, and we could use the latrine, which was a barrack set aside for a latrine, with a concrete built up, let's say, and holes in the concrete on one side, on the other side, and there was the latrine, and that was what we used. And then we would get back, and we could still stay outside. So we were sitting, if it was nice, let's say, it was warm, we're sitting outside, and I looked at the flies, and I thought, oh my God, you're so free. You could fly away, and I can't. And birds you didn't see, because this was a cleared area in Auschwitz. They took away, I noticed, well, anyway, Poland is mostly straight plateau. And there were no birds because there were no trees. So I never seen a bird as long as I was in Poland. Like I said, only flies. So we were sitting on the floor and talking and reminiscing and counting the flies, and that was our work.
Were there any suicides?
Yes.
What did you see?
The way these girls committed suicide, or young women, they were warned though, because they were, let's say, barracks and the wires, you know, the very much electrified wires, and barracks and wires and barracks and wires. Okay. So they told us, don't go near the wires, they're very electrified. But some girls had enough, so here and there, one did get herself electrified. And you know, once this happened, they quickly took her away. I mean, they didn't want anybody, I mean, as much as possible, nobody should see it. And because they felt maybe everybody will commit suicide. I don't know why they didn't want us to live, but I don't know what the hell they wanted to do with us. I don't know. So those are the suicides. But I saw suicides in Germany proper, the next camp where I was sent to.
While still in Auschwitz, what did you eat?
Okay, our breakfast was a little bit of black water, and let's say the bread was, let's say this would be a bread. They call it a Labenbread. I don't know if it was this big, but let's just say, for instance, this was cut in 4. So 1/4, we would get 1/4. It wasn't this thick. It was, you know, like, anyway, and I would get, let's say, 1/4 of that bread. No, of course it wasn't this big. It was maybe this big. So what did I do? What some girls did, they cut that 1/4 piece of bread in tiny slices. I don't know how they did it, because nobody had a knife. I have no idea how they did it. And always take a little piece during the day. I'm different to this day. If I have something, if I take a piece of chocolate, I will eat it up till the last. I cannot save it. And I have to have the taste of something. I got that piece of bread, I had to finish it, so at least once my stomach will feel a little bit full. And that's it. That was breakfast. Then for lunch, there was soup, some kind of smelly soup, a thick, smelly soup with grass in it, with everything. And there was a pail. Every, let's say, 20 people or so were entitled to a pail. And everybody took a sip or two from that pail. I'm a person, I have a lot of guilt in me, so I always feel guilty to take more than 2 sips. so I don't know, and I kept hoping maybe the whatever pail or whatever it's called will get around to me again. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. So that was lunch. Supper, the same thing. And that was basically our food for the day.
Do you remember any particular capos while you were there?
Well, this Ollie's girl, she was considered a capo. Yes. The men had their capos, the women had their capos. So I've seen capos in Germany, more so than in Auschwitz, because in Auschwitz, like I said, we were confined. We really had no access to seeing anything. All we could see is barracks and barracks and barbed wire and barracks and barbed wire and barracks, and couldn't see any homes. I didn't know that there is such a town as Auschwitz. I found out later.
Did you hear any music while you were there?
Yes. Yeah, I heard music, marching music I heard. Yes.
When would you hear this?
I would hear this in the morning and in the evening. You know, when people were going to work and coming back. That's when I would hear the music.
Did you ever see people being disciplined?
Yes, I have seen, not in Auschwitz. Like I said, we were mainly just with women, and we weren't there long enough to see, but I understand they were plenty disciplined, especially when they were building the place. So I couldn't say these capos. I don't know, why didn't I think of their names as capos right away? The mean ones, they used to beat up on the women sometimes. You know, 1,000 or 1,200 women in one room. Let's say a room from here to the end of my house, for instance. Even if they just whisper, the noise was deafening, just deafening. So sometimes she wanted it to be quiet. So if they wouldn't quiet down, she would beat up on them. So that's about the only discipline, you know. I had no way. I found out that there was discipline. I'll get to that if I can.
When did you leave Auschwitz?
I left Auschwitz, let's say, I was there like about 3 months. I came there in June, July, August. I left there like the end of August.
Why did you leave?
You're asking me? I can ask you, why did they take me there?
Were you told
I had
anything?
no idea, no. One day they came, they tell us that we are to go to the showers, to Entlausung, meaning getting rid of the lice. So we went and we got different dresses, and and we went straight to the train, to the wagons. But at this point, sometimes the door would be open because there would be an assessment with us riding. So I don't remember, though, how long it took for us to get from Auschwitz to Germany proper. Whereabouts in Germany I was, I could not tell you. Over here, I was sent to work. We arrived to a place called Kofering, and from there, I mean, all the people that were being sent away from Auschwitz arrived here. From there, they were being sent away to all kinds of different camps. I was sent away to a camp in Landsberg, which was called Lager 1. All around, there were about 7 concentration camps. Ours was, the number was 1. And I stayed there till the end. Over there, I saw hangings. I saw dead people. I saw being disciplined, being given 25 smacks on the behind. I heard the screaming. I heard everything.
So did you ever find out any of the reasons for these punishments?
The reasons, I just found out one reason. In the wintertime, of course, it was bitter cold, and everybody had one blanket. So where they worked, they had to march about 3 miles away from the camp. So, and they were all wearing wooden shoes. So they tore off a piece of the blanket to wrap around their feet. And this was somehow discovered, and this is why they were given 25 smacks on the behind, you know what I mean, with no clothes on.
What was used to administer this beating?
SS.
Do they have any instrument?
Yes, yes, they had sticks. I couldn't, I couldn't see it from close by. I just heard the screams because the men were on one side and the women were on the other side. And that's all. And we could just listen and moan along, and that's it. We knew that they weren't beating up on one another. So, so that was here.
Do you have any explanation about the hangings?
That I don't know. We never found out exactly. We were arriving home from work at night. It was dark already, and the camp, of course, the plaza was all lit up, and there was a guillotine in the middle of the plaza, and there were 3 men hanging.
Did you know them?
No. First of all, we weren't allowed to mingle with the men at all. We were entirely separate. You know, barbed wire separated us, the men from the women. So that was that. Now, what else can I tell you? What else would you like to know?
What work did you do in this camp?
In this camp, I worked at a construction. They were building underground plaza for planes to land underground. They probably wanted to hide. By this time, the war was going very badly already.
How did you know that?
How did I know that? Where I worked, at one point, I was a cleaning woman, what they called a putzfrau. And my job was to run their ovens, haul coal, bring coal, and feed the ovens for heat, and wash the wooden floors, and I don't know, bring water from the outside, bring in water, and you know, things like that. Actually, this was considered an easy job already. The only time that it was bad for me when they put me on night shift. That was bad. Remember? Do I have to repeat
Please tell
it?
me.
Yes. They put me on night shift because the men had night shift. Also, they were building this day and night. Obviously, they wanted it to be done. So this harmed me very much because I was already very emaciated and not be able to, and I wasn't able to sleep in the daytime because the people that worked in camp proper, on the plaza, on I don't know what exactly. They did the cleaning and the washing toilets, and I did this for a while, but after that they changed me to work here. And this was like 3 miles away from the camps. And the marching there, 3 miles is a long walk when you're hungry, you know what I mean. So I thought if this will continue, I will not survive. I didn't sleep and I didn't eat, so this was surely going to kill me. But I don't know, somehow God was good to me. They suddenly, for I don't know what reason, they changed me back to daytime. And so I continued what I did before I went to night shift.
When you were working, did you have any direct contact with the Germans? Did they ever speak to you or you to them?
No, but something very peculiar happened. Good, but peculiar. When I was a washer, well, not washer, a cleaning lady, a cleaning woman, when I was there. We always, around these offices, we worked in a forest. Of course, everything had to be camouflaged, so we worked in this here forest, and the offices were occupied by these engineers that conducted the work. That, you know what an engineer does, he engineers. So I lost my train of thought. Let me think. Yeah, they became a little bit more friendly. Like one, for instance, asked me, they called me Maria, they called me there. They say, you know, he says, I pass by your camp every day. Could you tell me what it's like there? I think I'm going to write a book. What is it like there? But he made sure that nobody saw when he is asking me this. But I got my thought back, and I'm going to jump back what I wanted to say before. They had SS men watching their offices all around. So one SS man, an older man, saw me, and he, I don't know, he became friendly with me, sort of. All of a sudden, I see he's taking out a small sandwich, and he is giving it to me. I says, oh my God. He looked around to see if nobody saw him, but of course this was, the office was here, and the forest was right there, and he was standing on guard duty. And he gave this to me, and I went in, and nobody was in there, and I ate it, and I blessed him. Well, do you know that every once in a while he looked me up, and he gave me a small sandwich. I mean, this was really a phenomenon to me.
Did he ever speak to you?
Hardly. He hardly spoke to me. Like I say, he was an older man. He was probably drafted. The Germans drafted him to, maybe he had pity for me, you know what I mean?
Do you know what uniform he was wearing?
SS uniform.
What color?
A Wehrmacht. Yes. He wasn't a Wehrmacht. But the craziest thing happened when they marched us out. We were, after a certain amount, being there a certain amount of time, we had to leave the camp and march away because the approaching armies were coming, in our case, the Americans.
When was this?
This was in 45.
What month?
This was in April.
What was your physical condition by that time?
By that time, my physical condition was, well, what can I say? I was emaciated, but not as bad as the men were emaciated. I don't know, maybe a woman just requires less food. So somehow, I don't know, my body, I have a small body, but big bones, and anyway, I just want to point this out. When we marched out a couple of thousand of us, and who do you think is right near me? This assessment. And there he is, and he gives me a piece of bread. And that was the last I saw of him. I seen of him or he of me, and that's it. But to me, this was a miracle. To me, this was a sheer miracle. And why did he pick on me? There were other girls there.
It's the end of our tape.
Okay.